What I want to speak about today is finding fault. And I read that in India, there's a saying that when a pickpocket meets a saint, he only sees his pockets. And obviously, that's a pretty limiting view. But the truth is that we often act like that too. We see the world in an equally limited view because we see it from the point of view of judgment. We see what we think is wrong and what needs fixing. And we do it not just to other people, but we do it to ourselves too. We judge ourselves for who we think we should be. And because we don't accept ourselves, we find it hard, we find it really difficult to accept other people. And one of the ways we defend ourselves is by highlighting the imperfections that we think we see in other people. You know, and in the Bible, when the people were going to stone the adulteress, Jesus said, "Let he who is without sin cast the first stone." And, you know, they walked away because who among us hasn't made a mistake? Who among us hasn't missed the mark? You know, everybody, we all have. And it's part of the joy and it's part of the agony, I guess, of being human. But we have the ability to rise above that. We have the ability to rise above our disappointments in ourselves, in other people. We have the ability to rise above when we don't think that we've done everything we can do, but we can still love ourselves. We can love our neighbors, and we can remember Ernest Holmes, who wrote, "The unity of good is a revelation of the greatest importance, for it teaches us that we are one with the whole and one with each other." So he's saying, you know, that we're all one with God, and since we're all one with God, we're all one with each other. And so on some level, when we criticize somebody else, we're actually criticizing ourselves in some way, and we're criticizing God, even though we might not be thinking like that. So I saw something this week written by a doctor who said that she had a teenage patient come in one day, and she said it was a young girl, and she said she was covered with tattoos and had all kinds of piercings on her body. And when they got all done, when the doctor got done examining her, this young teenage kid turned to the doctor and she said, "Thank you for not judging me." And the doctor said her initial reaction was that she felt really good, that this kid felt respected and felt that the doctor had honored her. And she said, after I thought about it a while, I felt sorry that this young kid had experiences that led her to feel she had to make that comment to me, that she had to thank me for respecting her as a person. She said, you know, when we judge people, we're treating people in a way that we wouldn't have wanted to be treated. And so I don't think I've ever talked about this in a message, but I know I've talked to some people in some of our classes. And one of the really difficult times for me in my life, it's going to sound silly, but it really was when I let my hair grow long. You can't imagine the stuff I took from friends and people that really I thought cared about me, because I just let my hair grow from really being short like Becky's to here. And I mean, people wouldn't speak to me. People would come to me and say, you know, people think you're going crazy, that there's something wrong, all because I grew my hair long. We had a couple over for dinner one night that spent the whole night telling me how many people didn't like me anymore because I let my hair grow long. And so about the time that this was happening, my youngest son and I were in Albertsons, and we were standing on line, and there's a kid in front of us that had his hair dyed pink and spiked. I mean, it was really spiked hard. And people were literally going around and pointing at him and laughing to his face. And my son leaned over and he whispered to me, "What do you think?" And so in a really loud voice, I said, "What do I think? I think it's fine. He can wear his hair any way he wants. It's a free country." And this kid turned around and he had tears in his eyes from everybody laughing at him. And he just gave me a big grin and he said, "Thank you." You know, I mean, who knows what the kid was like? Or I'm the same person, I hope, with long hair as short hair, but it's easy, so easy to judge. So I read an article by a minister named Robert Siddell this week, and he began the article by saying, how can we bring the joy of life itself into any relationship? And he makes 4 suggestions that I want to share with you. The first one, he said, we can give up judgments. We can give up judgments of ourselves, and we can give up judgments of the world. He said, you know, the world has extraordinary beauty. But if we're constantly carping, and if we're constantly judging, we cut ourselves off from the beauty that's all around us. And he said, you know, how do we know that some of the people that we're judging aren't really diamonds in the rough? They might be people who see things a little bit differently, but there still might be great beauty and great potential in all of these people. And if we judge them and make comments about them, we miss it. And the second thing he said we can do is to look beyond appearances. He said we can only find peace in our own lives if we're willing to look beyond appearances. He said we need to cultivate a deep inner love, an inner peace that takes us beyond the appearances of the moment. And then we're more able to experience love, we're more able to experience joy, we're more able to experience happiness, because we can feel the creative power of life itself to heal us. And the third thing he said we could do is practice selfless loyalty. And he gave some examples about how when he's not in a great mood, his wife is still really accepting of him. And he said, you know, what is love if it doesn't have loyalty in it? He said, love requires us to move beyond our own position, beyond our own attitudes, and truly, truly love somebody. And this really moved me. He said, think about this. If we can't move beyond the differences that we have with somebody we love, how are we ever going to create a world that works for everybody? And the fourth thing he talked about was learning how to shower love on those who are in your world, the people that surround you. And he said, what's the key to finding love in your world? He said, the key is to give as much as you possibly can to all of those around you, and to live not spending your life seeking love, but to spend your life giving love. So this week I read a story by a lady named Sylvia Clute, and this didn't happen to her, but she was writing about somebody that she either knew or had read about. And the person that she was writing about was a woman whose son was killed in a carjacking. The person that carjacked his car killed him. And he was caught, and after he was convicted, this woman spent the next 7 years every day praying he would die. And she did this for 7 years. And one day she realized that by praying for somebody else to die, she was killing herself. And so she made the decision to enter a restorative justice program. And the culmination, it was a year-long program, the culmination of the restorative justice program was having a face-to-face meeting in the prison with the person who had killed her son. And as part of it, they correspond back and forth. And in one of the letters he wrote to her, he wrote and he said, when we meet, don't expect me to apologize. So this guy was a hard case. So the day comes when she goes behind the prison walls, and she's sitting in a room waiting for them to bring him in to sit across the table from her. And she's thinking to herself, what do I say? You know, after a year now, she said, what do I say to somebody who's killed my son? And he comes in, and she starts to tell him about her son. She starts to tell him about the things they did together and how precious he was to her. And he was her only child, and she loved him so much. And he starts to break. And he said to her, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize how stupid this was. And then he told her he's never thought about it since it happened. And as he's telling her that, she hears a voice. And the voice says to her, reach out and give him your hand. And she says back to the voice, now this is all going on in her head, I can't. That's the hand that held the gun that killed my son. The voice says, reach out and give him your hand. And she says, God, I can't do this alone. But she closes her eyes and bows her head, and she reaches out and gives him her hand. She reaches out her hand, and he takes it. And after he takes it and they clasp hands, he puts his head down on their clasped hands, and he starts to sob. This is the same guy that said, don't expect me to say I'm sorry. And Sylvia wrote, she said, somehow they move to a place in consciousness where only forgiveness lives. All of the differences, different ways they lived and who they were, all of the differences and all of the bitterness vanished. That they were able to see the humanity in each other. And you know, when I read that story, I thought, if she could do that, compared to some of the small stuff that we get upset about, we ought to be able to do that too. And so I read something this week by somebody who's a Mormon who was talking about finding fault also. And he said, you know, what happens when we find fault is it distorts our perceptions. We see ourselves as superior to the person that we're finding fault with. And so we see others' faults and we overlook our own. That's why he's saying it distorts our perceptions. Because when I'm seeing what's wrong with Becky, I'm not looking at what's wrong with Ron. And he said, you know, in Matthew, in the Bible, Jesus asks, why do you see the splinter which is in your brother's eye, and you do not feel the beam which is your own eye, in your own eye? And he's saying that when we do that, we stall our own spiritual growth when we're focusing on somebody else's faults, because we're overlooking the work that we need to do. And he said, look at the race, you know, that we've all read about in Aesop's fables between the tortoise and the hare. The hare was really sure he's going to win. And so he takes a rest and he falls asleep, and you know, we know the tortoise wins. And he said the hare had the ability to finish, but he was so sure that he was going to win, he stopped doing the work. And so he's comparing that to us when we find fault. We're so sure that we're up here and we're not looking at what we need to do to grow and to be more, and we lose our perception and we lose the ability to be more spiritually aware. And maybe the reason that we have difficulties in our life and that we have weaknesses and shortcomings is a way, or we see them, is a way to really develop our own compassion and to be compassionate with other people. And what a tragedy it would be if we overlook our common humanness and just point an accusing finger instead. So I want to tell you something that happened to me last Sunday. And it all happened in my head. I was with Becky, but while it was going on until the end, which I'm going to tell you, I didn't say anything to her. But it showed me how fast we are to judge. You know, it's almost automatic. So let me tell you, Becky and I, after the service last week, we went out to eat. And if I'm sitting here facing you, Becky was opposite me, facing me. And at the next booth behind her, there were 3 people. There were 2 men who were facing in the same direction as me, and one on the other seat facing me. And it happened to be a priest. Okay? And so most of the meal, I'm facing the priest. When they ordered some booze, and then they ordered soup. And when his soup came, this is the story, instead of taking his spoon and bringing it to his mouth, he practically put his head in the soup bowl and was bending down eating. And my thought was, wow, what bad table manners, okay? That was the thought that was in my head. And when his meal came, he did the same thing. And I remember thinking again, wow, for anybody that would be bad table manners, but I would have expected a priest, they would have said something to him in the seminary, get your head out of your food. And so that's what I'm thinking, okay? And then I look, and I do not know how I missed it, but right alongside of him, and I didn't see it until halfway through the meal, was a large cane that was taller than he was. And I realized he's blind. He's blind. And the reason he was doing that is he couldn't see his food. So that was the first thing. And then getting near the end of the meal, Becky and I had a lull in our conversation, and I couldn't help but overhear their conversation. And I really don't know what preceded this, but this priest turned to one of the men, and he said, I love my life. My life is unfolding absolutely perfectly. And he kind of looked at one of the men, and he said, I would no more pray to have sight than you would pray to be blind. And I thought, oh my God, I really would like to get to know this guy because he is so spiritually aware. So in the course of the half hour, I went from judging him as being a sloppy eater to realizing, that there was a reason for it, to saying, I wish I could be friends with him. I bet I could learn from him. That guy really is spiritually right there. So the point is, when we judge, we don't always know the whole story. We don't know what's going on with the other person. And so I read an article by somebody this week named Karen Langford who said, we can choose to see the world through eyes of love. It's a choice. We can say, do I see trouble or do I see peace and cooperation? She said, you can choose to see good in people in the world. And she said, I'm not a Pollyanna either, but we can look at the world through the eyes of God. She said, even after great tragedies like 9/11 and Katrina, what happened? People came together to help from all over. And she said, so no matter what we're experiencing, we can still count our blessings. That when we focus on the good that we see in the world, we're looking through God's eyes, and that's the way it was meant to be. So I want to share another story with you that really moved me this week, and it's by a lady named Robin Carth. And she was blogging, and she said that she had boarded a plane, I think it was in Portland, a prop-driven plane for a short commuter flight. And the flight was full. And so she sits down, and she's sitting by the window, and every seat's going to be taken. And she said the person that sat down next to her was really obese, really, really obese. And he was sloppy. He needed a shave. She said he had a t-shirt on that was dirty and it barely covered his belly. And the first thing he did when he sat down was he reached in his pocket and took out a Tootsie Roll and started to eat the Tootsie Roll and threw the paper on the floor. And then he had to call over the stewardess because he was so big, he needed an extender on the belt to be able to wrap the seatbelt around him. And she said it made her shudder with distaste. And so partway through the flight, they start to talk. And he uses some language that she's really familiar with because it's 12-step language, and she had been in 12-step. So she asked him if he was in 12-step, and he said, yes, I am. And she told him she had been too. And so he turned to her and he said, when I sat down here, I felt an energy from you that said, you don't like me. And she didn't fess up, okay? She didn't say, yeah, you're right. But what she did do, she thought to herself, how could I judge him so harshly when I don't even know him? Where is my compassion and my love coming from? And she silently said to him and to God, I'm sorry. And then they start to talk some more, and he tells her for years he struggled with alcohol, and that he's in a program right now, but he's not really sure he's going to be able to make it. And so she shares her story with him. And then she starts to share the fact that one of the ways that she was able to make it was she found a faith that was really strong. And so he tells her he has questions about God. And he said to her to turn to you, he said, you know, I've had a lot of God shots before. And by God shots, he means, you know, quick kind of things where he felt God. He said, but now I'm really having a hard time finding God in my life. And now this is what she says to him. This is the woman who judged him so harshly. She said, let's stop for a minute and look into my eyes. She said, this is where God is between you and me. She said, God is in my soul, smiling into your soul. And she said, isn't our sitting together a pretty good God shot right now? And they both grinned. And she wrote, she said, two strangers on an airplane who helped one another understand themselves just a little bit better. So I want to close with something, another blog I read by a lady named Mama Donna Hennies. And she said, you know, we're all connected and joined as one. And we're all just trying to live the best we can. And all borders, all boundaries, all separations are pure illusion. We're all in this together, she said. So let's convene. Let's come together to make connections, to make friends, to make whoopee, to make magic, to make sense, to make art, to make amends, to make time, to make love, to make change, to make peace in our hearts and on the planet. So God bless you. Thank you for being here, and I wish you all a blessed week.